What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and we are here with another edition of Overthinking MTG. So today we're going to look at a random magic card, and I'm going to talk about it for at least 10 minutes. All right, so here we go. Let's see. The card that we're looking at today is Essence Scatter. Lovely. Okay, so this actually it's kind of appropriate because this recently just got reprinted in Ikoria. The version that we have here is actually from M13. So yeah, Magic Core Set 2013. Um, yeah, Essence Scatter is a common. It is an instant. It is one in a blue, counter target creature spell. It's very simple, very efficient. It does its job and it does it well. Yeah, it stops creatures from coming down. It's that simple. If I'm not mistaken, actually, I believe that this is a functional reprint of a card called Remove Soul, which I remember from back in 8th edition that functioned very similarly, if not identically, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, and so the gold standard with counter spells was a card called Counterspell. I'll go ahead and pull that up. So Counterspell, it was a card that was originally printed back in Alpha, and it was it had it, I love this card actually. I have a soft spot for Counterspell because it's perfect. The card's freaking perfect. It's 2 blue, counter target spell. That's it. It's just period, end of discussion. You counter the spell. And a lot of art throughout the years has shown various sorcerers doing like really impressive things, only to have them kind of like dirtle out and for them to be really bummed about it, including the one that we're looking at here, which is the alpha art. I'd highly recommend you go check that out if you're not familiar. But so that is the gold standard in counterspells. Counterspell is legal only in Commander and then Vintage and Legacy. It actually has never seen a modern legal reprinting, and so it's not even it's older than modern. And the thing is, this card is considered like just too good by a lot of people's reckoning, and as a result, we'll never see a reprint of it. At least not in any standard legal sets. Now, as you noticed, they have reprinted like promo versions of it in various, like the J Signature Spellbook and a few other places. So they understand, as well as I believe some of the master sets. So it's a valuable card. They like it. But Wizards has moved away from the two mana counter anything with no downside to cards like Essence Scatter, because what it does is all of a sudden the downside is you can only target creature spells. So with a counter spell, as long as you have 2 blue up, it doesn't matter what your opponent plays. If you don't want them to play it, you can just say no, stop, you can't. Meanwhile, with Essence Scatter, you can do that, but only if it's a creature. So they've kind of developed this rule where if a counter is what's referred to as a hard counter spell, then it has to cost at least 3. Now, what I mean by hard is it has no downside and no way that the opponent, the player who's playing the counterspell, there's no way for them to interact with it. There are other cards like Mana Leak, for example, which is 1 generic and a blue, counter target spell unless the opponent pays 3. Now, in the early game, that's just as good as a hard counterspell. Another version of that that is currently standard legal is Quench, which is exactly the same thing, except instead of paying 3, you have to pay 2, which is a little bit more fair because it becomes a little less. It becomes it becomes more fair faster, which is why they did it that way instead of simply reprinting Mana Leak. Because on Mana Leak, even a 2 mana spell that your opponent is playing, they can't reasonably play it until turn 5, as long as you have that in your hand. So that is very powerful. And so I can see why they wanted to do away with that. So, all right, that's fine. Meanwhile, you have Essence Scatter here. It's just counter a creature spell. So you still get a hard counter that only costs 2, but you can only target one little wedge of the potential spells that your opponent could play. So your options there are limited quite dramatically. Now, in a limited environment, it's great because creatures are very common in that meta. But like all counter spells, you need to make sure that the counters you select are a good fit for your meta, which is actually why that was the topic of yesterday's video. I discussed Tail's End, because I personally believe that with the way the meta has shifted in standard constructed right now, that card is going to be significantly better than it used to be. And the card itself has always been good, but it's just now there are more threats than ever for it to combat. Therefore, it has more stuff to counter because a counter spell is only as good as the cards it's countering. Because in the end, that's another thing you got to keep in mind. Counter spells are taking resources out of your hand. You have to devote slots in your hand for them. Do not ever, under any circumstances, play a counter spell just because you feel like you need to play something. Never do that. Only play a counter spell if the value that you are preventing your opponent from accessing is greater than the value that you are spending. Only. Just that is, and value varies depending on the situation. So it's not just a matter of, oh, that card only cost 1 mana. I can't counter it with this spell that costs 2 mana. That's not necessarily the case. Because if that 1 mana spell is something that's going to give them access to win the game, if you're on 1 life and they play a Cauldron Familiar, yeah, counter that thing. Get it out of there. No matter what you have to pay for it. Don't let that hit the field. Because if it hits the field, you lose. If you have a way to stop it, stop it. Even if it costs 3, even if it costs 6 mana, freaking do it, because in that situation, that's what's most valuable to you. Well, so yeah, and because counterspells have become more and more narrow over the years, it has helped rebalance the. It has helped rebalance quite a bit because in the past with counterspell costing 2, it was just it was 2, it was a hard counter, it hit anything, there was zero downside. So I can appreciate wanting to shift away from that. And so we do have cards like Cancel, like Neutralize, where they're 3 mana counter spells, but they're hard counter spells and they've added a little bit of upside to them. So all of a sudden, in addition to countering spells, you can also counter abilities like, oh, okay. Or in the case of Neutralize, you can cycle it if there's not something that's worth countering. And that actually fits really nicely into what a control deck is going to be doing because you're going to be holding that mana up anyway. So counterspells are interesting. They're an interesting phenomenon, and they are an interesting element of the game that can have a huge impact if played correctly. And if played incorrectly, they are a wonderful lesson to learn. That's for sure. So I like Essence Scatter. I think it's a good card. I think it's a very good card. I think it is solid. I personally would like to see a reprinting of Counterspell. I believe we've gotten to a point where the power creep is such that the threats that are out there are big enough and fast enough so that having a counterspell that strong certainly wouldn't hurt. Well, but you know what? Okay, I'm going to say something that's absolutely crazy, and I'm going to say it, and hardcore players who've been around a long time are going to say that it's crazy, but now is not. I retract my previous statement. Now is not the time for a reprinting of Counterspell. No, what I want to see a 2 cost hard Counterspell that is not in blue or green. That's what I want to see. Now, how do you justify that on the color pie? I don't know exactly, but I would love to see a functional reprint of Counterspell that somehow allows spells to be destroyed on the stack in red. Like, I would love to see that. Now, from a flavor perspective, like, how do you justify a Counterspell effect in red? I don't really know. It would have to be something around the way of destroying the spell as it's being cast. It couldn't. It would have to be something about it burning out in some way. So I'm not exactly sure how that works, but what I want to see us move away from blue having a monopoly of manipulating spells on the stack. And I know they don't have a monopoly. I know there have been some cards in the past that have allowed you to like change targets or um, you can prevent certain spells that like within certain confines. Like I understand there are a lot of examples out there of a lot of ways to interact with spells while they're out there. Like one of the ways that red interacts with spells targeting your own creatures, for example, is by hitting them with targeted removal so that the spell fizzles, like those kinds of things. Like I know it's out there. I know it exists, but blue right now is one of the only functions of the game that I can think of that has like a hardcore lock and like a monopoly. Like if you want to counter a spell, you have to be in blue or be playing something from Plan or Chaos in white. But like 99% of the cards that have said counter a spell on them have been blue. And I get that that's part of the flavor. I get that that's part of what that color does. And so them having the best ones, that's fine. I'm not opposed to that. But I think it's interesting that they have a monopoly in ways that other effects and other kind of gameplay mechanics just don't. Everybody else, at least green has it too, so why don't we just, green has life gain, green has card draw. Why don't we just give green counters too? Except not really. Let's give it to one of the other colors, please, please. And actually, huge, huge shout out. Thank you, Wizards, for giving black enchantment destruction. Thank you for that. That was a gift, and we needed it. As a black player myself, thank you. Just thank you. Anyway, that's an aside. But anyway, so yeah, counterspells are an interesting beast. There are a lot of different versions out there, and it's funny too. The amount of mana that you have to spend on a counterspell is like the number one factor for how valuable it is. If you look at something like Essence Scatter, I mean, it's a common. It's been reprinted a bunch of times, so you see it all over, and it's going to be reprinted in Ikoria once those physical cards are available for sale. So like, okay, and actually the new Ikoria art's freaking sick, by the way. If you haven't seen it, I would like it's gorgeous. I'm a big fan. So anyway, so it's a good card. Great. Um, but you'll notice it's like, and it's been reprinted to death, but it's not very expensive. Meanwhile, something like Swan Song, it's a hard counter, except your opponent gets like a 3/3 bird token or something like that. Like it's a decent sized bird that they get. However, it only costs one blue mana, and is going for a couple of dollars because like everybody who runs blue in Commander wants one of those because the fact that it only costs one makes it just one of the best counters, one of the most versatile, one of the most like useful counter spells. Meanwhile, something like cancel that costs two blue and one generic it's a throwaway common. You almost never see it, unless you're in limited, in a limited format where it exists. But I mean, even then, like you could probably do better unless you're going for like a really hardcore tempo strategy where you really want to stop their three drop for whatever reason. But yeah, anyway, so counter spells are just in general, I find them absolutely fascinating. They're Yeah, and I think Essence Scatter is a really cool example of a counterspell done right. The other thing that there's a card that was printed in Mirrodin that I just really want to give a shout out to because it's bonkers. Um, That's Isochron Scepter. If you're not familiar, this card is freaking gorgeous. It was originally printed at Uncommon. That's an artifact for two, and you can imprint any instant that costs two or less onto it. And then at any time, you can pay two, tap it, and cast a copy of that instant. And it's gorgeous. And so if you get a counter spell on one of these bad boys, your opponent just basically stops playing. It's so vicious. So yeah, getting an Essence Scatter on one of these basically means your opponent can't play creatures. Because you're going to counter the first one they play every single turn, every single time. Other thing for control players, leave your mana up. Always leave that mana up. That's actually one of the reasons why Flash is such a viable archetype right now, is because it's key. The key element of it is always keep your mana up. Play on your opponent's turn. Make their turn your turn. I like to think of it as our turn. I want to play together. That's ultimately what it's all about. So, yeah, guys, this has been fun. So this has been kind of a look at counter spells, a discussion around their mana costs, their history, kind of where they've come from. Yeah, I think it would be cool to see a reprint of counter spell. I don't think now is the right time for it necessarily. I think blue is a little too powerful as it is. But I think now is an excellent time for a reprint of Essence Scatter. I feel like that is going to join the the standard meta really nicely as a solid control option because there are so many great creatures out there. But at the same time, it's probably going to be primarily a sideboard card because there are a lot of great non-creature options out there too. It'll be interesting to see what happens post-rotation and after the next set, which I believe we're returning to Zendikar next, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that'll be interesting. All right, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out. This has been a load of fun as always. I hope you're having a wonderful day, staying safe, and I will catch you next time.